Welcome to our first development studies seminar of this semester. And we have a pleasure to have Sivendra Michael with us, who is a PhD student in our program. And he has done exciting work among small and micro businesses in PG, in the Bar district of PG and largest island, Viti Levu. And he will present factors of good and disaster resilience. And Sivendra has joined us like 2 years ago, and he is also one of the Pacific climate warriors. Plus, he has done a lot of work in general climate activism, but also participating in some of the United Nations climate negotiation conferences, the UNFCCC meetings. We were in Bonn, in Poland as well. Yeah, so he knows what he's talking about, and I think you will find that out. And we look very much forward to his presentation.
Thank you so much, Vinakabalil. So yeah, thank you so much for taking out your time and being here today. So I'll just try and speak louder. And I truly appreciate you being here. It's one of the key milestones of my PhD, which is presenting on my findings. However, before I like to start, I would like to also take this time to acknowledge and show my appreciation towards both my supervisors, Professor Andreas Neef and Dr. Jesse Grayman, who is on research leave at the moment, for your continuous guidance and for always pushing me beyond my limits and believing in me and believing in my topic. I truly appreciate all the critical feedback. And it has been a roller coaster of a ride, especially with a topic as sensitive to this. But thank you for guiding me through, and I appreciate it. So, my presentation today focuses on my preliminary analysis. I say findings, but it's actually not my final findings. So it's based on the fieldwork that I have conducted from last year as well. So just a quick recap. So I'll be giving you my research focus, why I'm doing what I'm doing, my theoretical framework, my methodology, and some of my reflections from the field, what I've gone through, my preliminary analysis, and a recap of that. And we can save the questions for the end. And I also have circulated a sheet for you. So because this presentation is going to be presented to the stakeholders back in Fiji, I would very much welcome any critical feedback that can help me improve my presentation and also can help me with my delivery when I go back for my validation. So yeah, my research focus. So I start off with this picture, and I've blurred the faces of the people here. Is a business owner who is actually a small business owner and who is actually getting water from a drain that is being created from the floods after April 2018 just to clean his shop. Why I'm putting this picture up in the very front is because of the fact that SMEs are one part of the one subgroup within the private sector that has constantly been neglected. Studies and scientific research has shown that human-induced activities and climate change has actually contributed to the increased occurrence of natural disasters, and on the front line of it is the communities very much and the individuals. But these members of the communities and individuals are also members that are employed within the SME sector. However, they are largely neglected. When there is reference to them, they are referred largely within the private sector spaces. However, the reference to which SMEs come out, SMEs as in small and micro enterprises, the reference to which it comes out in paper or in the articles is very minimal, and sometimes they are clustered amongst the bigger businesses. So this is the significant gap in my research, that while private sector is there, SMEs do play a crucial role within the private sector, but why are they not given the attention that they require? It is also a development interest, and the reason why I say this is because you have seen the rise of the term disaster resilience across all disciplines, across several disciplines, whether it be engineering, whether it be development studies, whether it be psychology. So the birth of this term, or started, however it started from the discipline of ecology and so forth, it has given rise to this concept of now public-private partnership, PPP. And at the UN negotiations, you see a lot of PPP, public-private partnership, being talked about. However, the extent to which SMEs are on the table talking about their interests, about how they can play a role in contributing to the building of disaster resilience is still missing. So for my point of view, I still think it's a strong development interest, and it is a critical gap, because despite all the newspaper articles, the magazines, the UN reports, and the articles, academic articles, development interest is mentioned, but not in relation to SMEs per se. It is mostly mentioned within the private sector sphere. So contextual background, as I've mentioned, that my research is focused within the Fijian context, and one of the main reasons is because I am from Fiji, and Fiji is also, its location is vulnerable to natural disasters, and the reason being is it's surrounded by the Pacific Ring of Fire, and in the middle of Viti and Vanuatu there is a tropical cyclone belt. So it is literally located on the tropical cyclone belt. Over the last 30 years, not including 2015 to date, it has experienced 139 natural disasters on record, of which 50% were floods. So around about 70 disasters of the over the 30 years were predominantly floods. And another thing to mention as well is, within my case study area, within Ba, there are 38 occurrences of flood over the last 30 years. Now, my case study area is just Ba boundary, so this is just a geospatial image. However, you can see that its location as well is making it vulnerable, because there is a main river that runs between the residential area and the town, and also these are all residential areas. So not only did I focus on the town area, I also interviewed businesses along this side, which I'll later discuss in the methodology section. But something that hits me really hard is that not only is Fiji vulnerable to natural disasters, is that the number of disasters that have occurred and are not on record is still yet to be determined. Only World Meteorological Organization only considers those disasters where the country declares state of emergency or state of devastation. So until or otherwise, if it's a very small disaster that does not have significant impact, such as a flood that occurs almost 3 times a year in this region, there is not actual accountability of that number of floods in the records. In terms of why SMEs, SMEs account for 72% of businesses in Fiji. They contribute to 60% of the employment. However, its contribution to GDP is 12%. I personally, in my opinion, do not think this is a correct measure, because SMEs have, the sector has a classification issue. Classification in 2 terms. When I say classification, one classification issue is the registration process. If a small and medium-sized enterprise wants to register its business within the private sector, at no point in time does the registration process require them to classify whether they are micro, small, or medium-sized enterprises. Then the second thing is, there is no database on the actual number of businesses that have been registered as this small, medium-sized enterprise, and the definition that is used to classify small and micro. There are currently 5 existing definitions, 3 of which coexist within government structures: the Fiji Reserve Bank, Fiji Revenue and Customs Authority, and the Fiji Development Bank. So 3 different definitions by 3 different government bodies, plus 2 others, one by international donor agencies and the other one by MDF, which is a market development facility, which is also focused on SME sector development, but they have their own definition. So there is issues of classification, there is issues of numbers. The only number that I got of 4,257 SMEs currently existing in the whole country was from Reserve Bank, but when asked where did they get the number from, what they said it was a statistic predictor element that they got from the 2011 registrations of FIRCA returns. So we have also a Reserve Bank employee in the room, and she can also confirm that. In terms of my research question, so my study is focused on gathering an in-depth understanding. So I'm trying to understand what are the enabling and constraining factors of building resilience towards the SMEs. And in doing so, I have 4 sub-questions. First, I look at the impact. So I'm trying to understand how have small and medium-sized enterprises been affected over the time. And with time, I let the participants decide from what year to what year have they experienced the disasters. In terms of process, I say process because I talk about the preparedness, the response, and then the recovery. So 3 stages of how the disaster affects them. So what do they do to prepare for, how have they responded, and then how have they recovered from the natural disaster. And in doing answering these 2 questions, it helps me, guides me into my 3rd question, which is strategies and measures. Basically looking at the strategies and measures that have been used to enhance the resiliency of small and medium-sized enterprises. So what do SMEs themselves consider from their point of view as strategies or measures that would help them to become more resilient in either of the phases. And lastly, which is going to form my other chapter of my PhD, is also the role of disaster institutions. What do disaster institutions do? How are they influenced? To what extent do they support small and medium-sized enterprises? Because there is so much talk about PPP, public-private partnership, I want to understand what does the disaster risk institutions do. And these are the things that I will be talking about in the next couple of slides. So before I start my analysis, just my theoretical framework. So I use a multi-theoretical framework including a couple of theories. First one is critical awareness theory, because my assumption from this theory, or the key constructs that I draw from this theory, is the knowledge. So the forms of knowledge that one gets that can inform their perception for action. So how do SMEs, or as individuals or as owners, are able to perceive the need for action? So looking at the constructs of the perception of action and relative salience. Then I go on to the theory of planned behavior. Now this is an interesting one, because the theory of planned behavior has been widely used in the discipline of psychology, and quite seldomly has it been used in social sciences or the discipline of development studies. What is important about the theory of planned behavior is the social norms and attitudes that arise from disaster events. So how does a person plan their behavior? Is it influenced by social norms and attitudes? Is that their intention, or so forth? So trying to understand that as well when I was out on the field. Next, a very important one within the discipline, or within the array of discipline of disaster management, is social capital theory. And with the social capital theory, there are many different interpretations. What I took on board was not only Beddoes, who is the founder of social capital, the father of social capital, but also Aldrich, who talks about the aspects of bonding and bridging social capital, which is within and outside the circle of drawing networks and informal and formal networks as well. Next, and the last one, is the complex adaptive systems theory. I also believe that complex adaptive systems theory is one of the theories that have been called out by many disciplines, because it's largely used by natural sciences and disciplines like economics, physics, and so forth. But what is unique about the theory is the emergent behavior component and the context-based responses. When I say context-based responses, what the complex adaptive systems theory says that the impact of the disasters are non-linear, in the sense that you cannot compare Fiji to Christchurch, you cannot compare Fiji's case to Indian tsunami, because the impact that is on the individual is not linear. And the way they emerge their behavior, what causes them to emerge their behavior, is quite unique in different contexts. So it recognizes the context-based responses. And it also recognizes self-organization, which means that it recognizes social capital, the theory of planned behavior, and critical awareness. And in saying that, it is the process that I look at, which is the process of building resilience, where the other 3 theories gel very well into the complex adaptive systems theory. And in my opinion, if I do find complex adaptive systems theory to explain my data, there is also a contribution, a significant contribution into the discipline of social sciences, because it's rarely being used in this discipline, while we are being called out by natural science researchers that we should start adopting natural science models to try and, or theories to try and see if it works in the dimension of social science as well. So my research methodology, my epistemological positioning, meaning what angle I'm going into the research in. So there is quite an array of epistemological positionings. I come from the constructivism or the social constructivist perspective, where I say that I'm not trying to unearth a single truth. That is not my intention. My intention is to gather an in-depth understanding of the factors or the phenomenon being studied, which is building resilience. How do these SMEs build resilience? So, and also constructivism recognizes that the truth is the in-depth understanding will be formed by not only me as a researcher, but also by my participants, because they will help me interpret their understanding of the phenomenon being studied. In terms of my research approach, mine is a very simple, qualitative, it's not simple, sorry, it's qualitative research approach. I'm using one of the forms of qualitative research approach that I'm using is narrative inquiry approach, because I'm gathering knowledge and I'm gathering in-depth understanding from the field. So why narrative inquiry approach does work for me as well is because it's about getting those stories, and how do I get those stories will be explained in the next part. So the data collection methods with the narrative storytelling, I use in-person semi-structured interviews. So there is no formal way of asking them a question. Now, when doing that, I also recognize within the narrative inquiry approach this space for the Talanoa approach, where we have discussion. We don't, especially when you're talking about impact, when you're talking about what was the experience like, we cannot have like a checklist momentum where did you do this, did you do that, or did you actually put all your things up? So it was more about getting them to tell me the story. So that discussion was very much needed, and having it in informal spaces, which actually allowed me to have an in-depth understanding of what's going on in the context. I also use direct observation as a data collection method, and this being, after my interviews, I asked participants to walk me through the complex and try and see what are some of the things that they have done, and ask them permission if I can take photos, like what have you built in your shop, what are some of the things that you had before that you have changed now. So just observing that as well to try and have a better understanding. In my data collection method as well, while I did receive a lot of documents on the field as well, what I did wish to acknowledge in this space is that out of the 59 interviews with the small medium-sized enterprises that I made, those of which 4 of them were closed businesses, so businesses that had shut down. So I made the effort to try and reach out to those businesses that have actually closed down, and the only way I could do that was through the Talanoa approach, by talking to them and asking them if they had any idea of any businesses that closed down, and if so, how can I reach them? Can I go to their, can you like locate me or direct me to where they are staying? Or if their business has moved, can you please help me to locate them? And apart from the 59 interviews, for the role of disaster institutions, I actually interviewed 34 heads of disaster risk institutions to understand. That includes insurance company, UN agencies, banks, government, civil society, and so forth. So that's part of my data collection. And my data collection phase is completed, just acknowledging that as well. From September 2018 to March 2019, for the 6 months, I was on the field collecting my data. In terms of my data analysis, I'm here using a software. It's a computer-assisted qualitative analysis software called Atlas TI, which helps me to theme the data. Now, before I go on to explaining about my theming of the data, I need to also bring to your knowledge that these interviews were researcher transcribed, so it gave me an opportunity to sit and look inside, like when you are on the field, you are listening, that's one thing, and you're reflecting, that's another thing. But when you come back and you re-listen to those interviews and type it out, you are actually there in the moment and reliving those experiences. So it really helps you start asking more questions. And that leads me to my analysis method, which is thematic analysis. And I adopt the Braun and Clark method, who clearly states, both the authors clearly states that themes do not emerge, they are researcher driven. So the researcher is actually telling you what kind of theme they have put their findings under. So in case you see my findings been discussed in, or similar findings been discussed in another paper which may have another theme, just know that Braun and Clark acknowledges the notion of thematic analysis does not require the themes to emerge. It can be researcher driven. And lastly, my fieldwork reflection. I feel like this is very important to share because when I was in the field on October the 23rd, there was another flood, and it was a roller coaster of a journey, because when I was there, people kept telling me like, I wish you were here to witness what we go through. I wish you were here to witness what we go through. And until that day when the flood started, and I was there, and I saw how people were like everyone was just leaving the business owners to do their own thing, employees running home to save their own homes. It just made me feel so, how do I say it? Like there's no, words can't even explain like how I felt. So I went into this shop and I helped this lady, a 60-year-old lady, lift her fridge up onto the counter, and she said, I don't even know if this fridge is going to be here when we come back. So it just goes to show that like that whole experience just gave me greater appreciation of what I do and why I'm doing this research. And it made me realize that on that day, that despite all the emotions that I was going through while collecting my data, that there is a purpose behind why I was there in that field and interviewing SMEs as well. So just, maybe it's a personal bias that I'm acknowledging, but I think like being there at that moment and reflecting on that experience of going through a flood at that very moment was a realization or a call to action for me as well. So in terms of my analysis, just talking about disaster impact. So yes, there's a lot of direct impacts. There's business assets and stocks that get damaged, the external infrastructure that gets damaged. There's temporary closure as well, because when there is infrastructure damage, there is no water and electricity, so the businesses cannot operate. And also, there is a lot of indirect, a lot of other direct impact on the individual themselves, which I'll discuss as we go forward. So in terms of the indirect, this price hike component is, there's two things to it. So it's a win-lose or a win-win situation in my view. For restaurants that rely on vegetation, when the floods affect the whole community, the price of vegetables go really high, and therefore the restaurants have to decide on alternative ways of sourcing income or selling something else because the vegetable price is so high. Now what was interesting from the field is when I heard about price hike and I asked what they did, my instinct feeling was that they would have gone to the nearest town, which is Lautoka, to go and buy vegetables within the Bah province. But that wasn't true. Most of the owners, they had to source supplies from the capital because it was even more cheaper than sourcing the goods from the nearest town. So something that came very shocking to me, because I thought that with empathy, other businesses that are not affected by natural disasters would have kept the price low. But maybe I am not understanding, it must be a supply chain issue. They must be also affected by where they get their supplies from, because most of the market vendors depend on an external source. So they must be worried about that. And then the other thing is the customer and sales turnover. This has many dimensions. One of the ones that I want to discuss today is the reason why the customers do not come over. So during the time of disasters, most other community members are affected. And because they are affected, they are unable to afford other things like a radio or tech device or something of that nature. So they would rather leave to the basic needs and then come and buy things like a radio or a mobile device that they have lost during the flood. So Also, they don't want to come to town because of the health hazard, because it's so smelly and it's so dirty that they think that I can go to the nearest community shop and get whatever I need rather than going all the way to town to get the goods. Also, transportation issues that happens because the road is broken or something of this nature, so they can't commute to town. But the other dimension of sales and customer turnover, which I have an example of, is that actually floods also present an opportunity, and I'll show you shortly. So the other thing that I didn't want to leave out is the psychological risk, the emotional stress, and the associated health risks that affect the individual, because a lot of these businesses have been trapped in their shops while trying to save their stock. So although they know and they have experience of the disaster, there are certain aspects such as unpredictability of floods or the timing of the floods, how fast they occur, that leads them to respond in a very reactive manner rather than a proactive manner. Yes, they can respond to it in a proactive manner, but they still believe that it's unpredictable. So they wait around in town, they see the water level, and then they go and act to like move it a bit higher or maybe something of this nature. So when they get stuck in the shop, that emotional stress of what they experience is something that I would not fully understand because I was not there, like to even experience it. But when they tell me the stories and they get emotional, is the part that makes me realize that this is not only that one experience, it actually stays with them. It actually moves on with them and they cannot forget that experience. And like I said, it is an opportunity, as I have knowledge on customer sales over. Some of them think, depending on the nature of the products they sell, and one good example is electricity. So those companies that sell small light bulbs and things like provide electrician services, like for them it's an opportunity. An opportunity in the sense because all businesses are mandated to get their electrical ports checked. So they would hire these electricians to go after the floods to check. So for them it is actually sort of an opportunity for business, and also it enhances their experience and their ability to implement measures. And this is just an example of the business that I was talking about that is closed and still closed till today. So tried to recover 4.5 months after operating, and it's still closed. And he tells me, this is me at his house talking to him, he says, hardly people are here to witness what we have to go through. It's the worst time in my life. Imagine having water and biscuit 3 times a day or sweets just to kill hunger. Nobody in town will come and give you food. I have pictures to remind me of these bad days in business. And this is another business that was supposed to open on the 2nd of April, which is the Monday, and Sunday was the 1st of April floods. So before even opening, they had all that damage to the shop. So they didn't plan this, but it came and they didn't know that they had no experience of operating in bar. So they had like all these damages. And she goes on to say her perspective of other businesses that are thriving. And she says sometimes the floods are good for the business because government gives money to individuals affected. So for example, local people in Yadalevu whose things are well damaged, they will come to our shop for clothes. So she's acknowledging that although she has got damaged stocks, but the nature of her goods for that business will actually draw customers in. So in terms of preparedness, and like very quickly, how have they enhanced their preparedness? It's the experience and the risk attitude, which is shaped by the severity, the unpredictability, and the frequency of the floods that they have experienced in the past. Also, a lot of the experience comes from word of mouth that is passed on from generation to generation. So they share, the parents share the experience with their son who takes over the business. This preparedness is enhanced by social capital and acknowledging the type of social capital. There's a lot of social networks amongst businesses within. So for example, if the participant acknowledged that he was old, but he said that every time that there is rainwater starts coming in, the Chinese man next door comes and helps me lift my things up. And he said, maybe because I'm old and he knows I'm old, but it's that network that they have established and the trust that they have established. Forms of media such as newspaper, radio, and TV news. Most businesses have had communicated that they still rely on their natural instincts that the flood is about to occur. They still know that when it's heavy rain for this number of days or for this duration, that the floods is bound to occur. They also know that they will go and check the river, and if the river is at this mark, then the floods is going to occur. However, they acknowledge that it is unpredictable because in the past, it took 2 to 3 days to flood the same town that we are looking at on the first picture. And now, it takes 6 to 7 hours for the same flood to occur. So they have to change their ways of preparedness, and one of the key ways in which this social media has informed them is because there is these features in digital technology like live stream, marking yourself safe, and then the news feed. So people from other different places like Rakiraki and Tavo, which is also very vulnerable to floods, are posting what's happening in their side. So they are able to prepare by just going through the social media app. There's also a social media app called Windy Y. Within the Facebook, they can see weather. So Facebook's got this feature that can be able to tell you what is the weather forecast in that area, and you are able to mark yourself safe or unsafe. So people are able to communicate that knowledge. If they are unable to call their cousins, their family in other parts, which are vulnerable, prone to flood before the town gets flooded, they are able to communicate through social media on what happens. Another form of social media that they very formally use is Viber. They have formed this group with businesses outside of Ba. So communities. They have people in Tavoa that are going or most likely getting flooded before. And even if the business in Ba gets flooded before Tavoa, they are able to say, hey, Ba has this situation right now. Are you guys preparing? So that message goes, people start reading, people start communicating. But the downfall is, with social media you require internet connectivity, and when it does work in the preparedness phase, but when the disaster actually comes, a lot of network is jammed for a country like Fiji, and these messages do not flow, and people have acknowledged that connectivity remains a key challenge. The other thing that constrains their preparedness is, I wouldn't say constraints, so beg my pardon, I would say it actually makes them more aware of what to do. Is because they are aware about their knowledge about insurance, and their ability for them to get insurance is quite large. They know that insurance would not companies won't underwrite them, or if they do underwrite them, then it's going to be unaffordable. So they start knowing these things or acknowledging that these are the challenges that exist within the operating environment, and therefore they make necessary actions. And lastly, the business environment, and I think this comes with the business characteristics as a subset. When I talk about managerial autonomy and rent and space issues, it's almost interlinked. Most businesses, if they rent the space, they cannot make any structural renovations because it's not their building, so they have to deal with what they have. Then there is space issues as well within the location in which they operate, which actually also determines, if I ask them, would you move from here if you were given a chance to, and they would almost 90% say no, because they know that their location is prime to attracting customers. So it's a situation that they are in where they are bound to making these decisions where they cannot move because they have to just be located there if they want the customers. If they locate somewhere else, they stay in other businesses that are going to sell that product to them. And the other managerial autonomy is when the town council also owns many businesses, and they actually have their own conditions on what needs to be done in terms of preparedness. So this may either get them to be better prepared, or from the perception of SMEs, maybe a cost burden, which may lead to them not making any changes because they know at the end of the day it's not their building. So this is me in one of the during the field works. And the flood deck that is being built here, and you can see a little pulley. So how did they get the fridge up? They used this pulley to pull the fridge up to that level. And this is literally 6 days after the flood, so you can see the color of the floor, the markings of the flood, and this flood deck is at 8 feet 4, so above the height of this room. And they still told me that sometimes water level can reach there because they are located on the lower side of Bartown, which is the market subdivision. I'm standing on the 4th step trying to see what's on top, and you can see that there's just this space where they lift things. And she tells me, we removed the majority of our stocks from our shop before the cyclone season. We only keep enough for the day. And if the customer wants something in particular, then I go home and get it. We have built flood decks to store our equipment and supplies, but once the water level had almost reached that level. So that's what she says. And the other friend that I interviewed, by the way, it's superficial names, it's not real, for confidentiality purpose. So he says to me about insurance. He says insurance are more than what we can afford. We did ask once in 2012, but the policy to cover was really expensive. And Tower Insurance, the sales agent, explained that we are marked in the red zone that is prone to flooding. So flood insurance only covers damages of 3 meters and above. So his point of view is, why should I get an insurance when I'm already storing my goods 3 meters and above? So he's already having this perception. And in my position, I cannot tell him, but insurance is going to save you from, even if it's unpredictable, if the floods go higher than 3 meters. But it's just this perception that there's no point in buying insurance because I'm already doing this, this and this. And lastly, acknowledging that there are not enough spaces in Bartown where you can rent a warehouse or at least get a small space for stocks. Again, just quickly going through the response strategy. It's influenced by prior experience, your perception of risk, your reliability of knowledge source, which I've just mentioned, your social capital, the ability in which you respond, the rate at which you respond, whether you are reactive or proactive also is dependent on this factor. Structural barriers, like if the road closes, they are not able to get into town. If there's a curfew, they're not able to get into town. So these are all barriers for them that actually can hinder their ability to respond. And lastly, the characteristics in which they operate, which I've just said about the location and so forth. And this is an image from that flood where the police officers are actually saving the business owners that have been trapped in their business. So they are coming to save them and then from this case example, they were not able to call the police officers. So their family had to try and call the police and say that he's located in this building, he hasn't come home. And then they will try and go and locate them. And this is their response. If I see any possible flooding or receive any information from my friends, I instantly call my neighbors to let them know. Many businesses have several years of experience and they know when it is about to flood. However, no one can predict the severity. And the other guy that is sitting there, Mr. Ratnam, he says, nowadays when we see heavy rain, we know that there is a possibility of flood. So there is no waiting game. We do not want to wait for the water level in the creek to reach a certain level like we used to before. Since no one will cover our losses, we need to be prepared, don't we? So he's asking me, nobody's going to come and care about us, so we need to start doing something about ourselves. So acknowledging that as well. In terms of recovery, just relatively straightforward. There is some discussions about the socio-economic situation in Fiji. And I talk about security and bureaucratic procedures. And when I say this, I'm highlighting the security issue in the sense that when the flood waters recede and they are starting to clean and going into reopening their shop, there's a lot of theft that happens within the town. And the reason why this happens is because from their perception again, is that most people have not enough to put food on their table. So they will come and break into the shops to try and take whatever we have. And they will force themselves into these spaces. And the bureaucratic procedures, although they have recovered flood after flood. So in April, there was 3 back-to-back floods. April 1st, April 6th, April 10th. 3 back-to-back within 10 days, and the processes, they have to call or hire an electrician by themselves to get the power reinstated. They need to get a Health and Safety Act before they can open the door for the customers. They need to if you are a restaurant, you need to get the Ministry of Health to give you a certificate before you start selling food. So there is all these procedures that's already on them. However, I asked the question, to what extent do you have to adhere to these procedures or processes? And the honest opinion I got is that if you do not, then the town council has the right to close you down. So, from their point of view, again. Disaster politics is another important one that I talk about. It's their perceptions towards disaster and their unequal distribution, which has actually shaped them from their recovery. They have said that they have never received any form of support apart from their own family members. So they know that their communities are going to be helped. They won't be helped, so they need to do something about recovering themselves. The culture of coping. In my words, I would say this is what I say is resilience, in my perspective. And when I say that, is because they have this passion and drive that no matter what happens, they will get knocked back down, they will get back up, because it is their livelihood. It is what they rely on. It is, some of them, it has been passed on from generation to generation. So they will try to cope no matter what. And lastly, social capital. I'm talking about moral support versus financial support. Although they don't have a moral support, they do get, although they don't have financial support, they do get moral support. And financial support in the sense as disaster aid. Nothing more than disaster aid. I'm only looking at disaster aid, like if some other institution or organization is supporting them in any capacity. But it's only, apart from the family, there is no one else. So, again, pictures from this recent flood in 23rd, and this is one of the highlight pictures. This shop, which I've just for confidentiality purpose, has let go of all the damaged goods, and this is the population that was in town at that very moment, is picking up whatever they can. So literally, they are picking up whatever they can from the damaged goods, and that's when the brawl happened. And I was just, like telling myself, like, these people are desperate. They need something to make from whatever they can collect. They are even going to wash those clothes and wear it because they have lost everything. And that's a picture of how bad the muds are in the town. I'm sorry the picture is not so clear as I thought it would be. And then this is a picture of where the businesses actually go out and help the communities. So then they not only are worried about themselves, these small businesses also play an important role in the community as well. And this participant told me, how can we give up? Our business is our bread and butter, so we try our best to get back up one way or another. Even if I did want to go and work somewhere, nobody would hire me as I do not have a qualification. And Ms. Kumari says to me, we appreciate if the government or the town council would have come and at least see us instead of driving past with their windows up. It hurts, And she broke down, like literally in front of me, and it's just that they don't even want the disaster aid. They just think that if you can just stop and say if you are okay, how are you coping with this? Is there anything that we can do? Even wash your shop, help you with washing your shop. Just a thought is what they need. But she says that they don't even do that, according to her. So what is the role of disaster institutions? Is SME even a priority? The mandate of the National Disaster Management Organization, the NCSMED, National Council of Small and Medium Enterprises, enacted in 2002, is more about sectoral development and sectoral growth. And although there is no reference to words like resilience or disaster preparedness or enhancing their ability to respond, there is this quite strong drive on making sure that the sector is going to continue growing. And in saying that, 18.3 million was handed out as a $1,000 grant for businesses to start up. If those that had a business idea and wanted to start up, there was that grant available to them. But for them to sustain that business, whether it's going to sustain or not, is a question that remains unanswered. And from the disaster organizations, when I asked them, what did you think about the grant instead of the disaster enhancement, they said to me that in the honest opinion, that was trying to get the people in the informal sector into the formal sector. So if they are entitled to the grant, they need to formally register to use that $1,000. So that was kind of the drive to get them from the informal to the formal sector. So now, according to the latest news article, there's 18,532 small and micro businesses from this process of MSG, which is Micro Service Grant. Then there's this council, it's called FBDRC, Fiji Business Disaster Resilience Council, and it's talking about representation and PPP exclusion. So at no point in time there is any SMEs sitting within this council. However, there are thoughts or they are considering how or avenues to include them. And quickly, there are plans for creating a central coordinating agency for SMEs, but the reality is that there is still intercoordination challenges. There is one ministry that is responsible to do the policy, while there is a few others that are responsible to do the implementation. So they need to know that if there are discussions, well, from the government's point of view, if they're going to have a hub for SMEs, they need to sort out the intercoordination challenges too. Disaster politics, which I've talked about, and lastly, sectoral policies, and I'll give you the example of reality of insurance versus paramedic. So when the floods continued to happen, insurance companies said, we will not cover flood. But the government said, no, you have to cover flood. So what the insurance company did is they said, we will tell them with conditions that you have to put it above 3 feet and above, like you have to do certain things to be entitled to flood insurance. So now what the government has done is they are now going to paramedic insurance where it's based on a trigger. So if this place gets a flood, everybody gets a payout even if your business is affected or not. So they're starting this discussion and I hope it's going to be something that comes out, but right now flood is still off the radar for flood. So yeah, so basically that's one of the handouts picture when they were giving out the $1,000 for the grants. So people with all their documents and their plans show up to the park and produce it to the government offices, and then they get the 1,000 or they don't get the 1,000. And there are statements or excerpts of interview testimonies from the banks that say that SMEs only come to us because we are called the bank of the last resort. So it is only normal to assume that they might be coming to FDB because we have better rates, but we don't. And the government minister tells me SMEs are probably whining about why the government did not reach out to them. They need to start talking about appropriate actions. So stop whining and stop the handout mentality. So that's the exact words he told me. So in summary, just to recap very quickly, in terms of constraining measures, I have categorized it as business characteristics like the size, the age, and so forth. The structural barriers which continues to exist because of infrastructure, the adaptive capacity, manpower, and so forth. Socio-political situation which is continuing to exist because of the handout mentality and the restrictive policies. And my enhancement ones are social capital, coping culture, risk attitude, and contextual experience. So with those words, thank you. So we're already over time. Any questions?
Time for 1 or 2 questions. Is the other group like Chris is coming in? Where's the question?
Yeah.
Okay. I was looking at your slide on disaster impact, and I was wondering, because you didn't mention anything about like employees or staff dynamics between the owners. So did you primarily interview SMEs without any employees, or is this like something that did not come out?
No, I interviewed SMEs with employees and without employees, and employee challenges did come out, but I just chose like the most primary issues that came out from the interviews. So employee challenges did exist because of transportation and so forth, but they also said that employees are one of those that provide the most moral support in times of disaster response.
You talked about employees who kind of bail on on the business owners to go and save their own home. What happens with the home of the business owners that's there trying to save their business?
That's what they keep telling me. Like, you know, we are just not people on financial statements. We have life behind this financial statement. There's a whole different angle behind the financial statement. So while they are coordinating with their other family members at home by phone or by text message, they are not able to get there because their livelihood or their source of income is the business. So they stay, like that example of the biscuit and water to survive was him trapped in the shop because he knew that he couldn't get home because the roads are closed, and he knows that his wife is going to try and do whatever she can at home, and the community is there to help. Yeah.
Just building on that, you talked about a respondent who said she keeps some stuff at home. So it's like home is safe, the shops are not safe.
Yeah.
So what's the council's response? Because if you're talking about SMEs, you're looking at the national level, looking at the state, their response to. But I think councils should be more responsible to these SMEs. I think you should not necessarily answer my question, but just look at that with much more critically. If they are red zones, you mentioned red zones. If they are red zones, why has council not closed where constantly gets flooded? So it's worrisome. If home is safe, why has home not become where the homes are? Why have that place not become the business places?
Yeah.
Then, you mentioned 4 theories. It's important we see how the theories combine in your analysis. Then some of your analysis tend to contradict the respondent. Like you said, the respondent wanted moral support. The respondent complained that there was no that the government officials pass and don't give them moral support. But you analyze that they have moral support, they don't have financial support, so it's contradictory. Then maybe you look at your gap again.
Yeah, so the moral support one is like they get the. Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but there's this group.
Yeah, so we have with us, just for 1 minute, we have Brianna Farrell, who is our Council of Elders from the Pacific Climate Warriors. She is one of the founding members for 350 Samoa and is the leader of our environmental group Future Rush at the age of 11. At the age of 16, she was the youngest ever recipient of a Commonwealth Youth Award for SDG 13 on climate action. So Brianna is going to just be here to, as a member of a Pacific Climate Warrior, we are just going to recite our Pacific Climate Warrior prayer to end.
This is called a chant for our warriors. You are Matangi Malohi, strong winds, a symbol of our movement, blurring identities, validating purpose, strengthening stewardship over this vanua we are called to protect. You are stained bark cloth for skin, saltwater chants, dancing with the moon, and reimagined dreams pacing with the tides. You are Matangi Malohi, strong winds from sacred places and revered spaces, a spiral kaleidoscope of broken coral and a memory called to collect, curate, and reconcile. You are Matangi Malohi, strong winds rising up and villaging children, brown bodies molding brown minds, moving between Hila and warrior. You are a future ancestor carving visions of liberation we can't even imagine. You are Matangi Malohi, strong winds seeking frontline truths in this transcendent Talanoa of knowledges. masculine culture, feminine consciousness, woven together, loosed together, wai donu. You are Matangi Malohi, strong winds from the four pillars of our fale. The same ancestors that are calling you to belief will also call you to unbelief, so your faith can take new form, so you can return to the source and be reminded of the commonality of our plurality. You are Matangi Malohi, strong winds, listening, nourishing, transforming.
We are stewards of the gifts from our old people. Nungu wasa wasa, era savura, era savura, era savura.
My ocean, they have emerged. Thank you.
Can I just ask you to very quickly evacuate the room so that